So let's make a start talking about the categories, defining the babies, children and young people who could benefit from palliative care. So at the moment, as we are all aware, the system is still largely based on an older model of children's palliative care, the one that doesn't fully reflect what we're seeing in practice today. Children, as you know, are living longer, they're becoming more medically complex and moving across multiple services and settings. So what we're dealing with is not a small static group of children, it's a growing, increasingly complex population. And the system hasn't quite caught up with that shift. Now, speaking of the old models where it says that it's out of date, can anyone shout out the date of the first definitions of categories of children's palliative care that were produced by ACT? Now, I can give you a clue. Anyone know the year?
It was 1997.
Oh, spot on. Fantastic. Yes, it was 1997. Now, anyone know the most recent update that were Together for Short Lives completed? Now, again, I can give you a clue. What year was this? Any takers? Any guesses?
2011?
Oh, no, bit later.
2018.
Ooh, love, perfect. 2018, it was indeed. So that was the last time that the categories were updated, which actually feels, when you look at these pictures, feels like a long time ago because it was. So the challenge, as we've said, we're seeing in practice that the current system isn't consistently meeting the needs of children and families. There is significant variation in access where a child lives can determine whether they are identified early, what services they can access, how much they can support that they can receive, and creating the postcode lottery that we talk about often. We know families experience this very directly. Secondly, we're seeing late recognition of children's palliative care needs. So often palliative care is introduced very late into a child's journey, and sometimes, and from a neonatal point of view, in my background, sometimes that's only at a point of crisis. And that means that there's missed opportunities for planning. There's increased distress for families, and quite often there's more reactive, emergency-driven, crisis-driven decision making. So thirdly, there's an inconsistent commissioning across ICBs. So different areas are funded and funding services differently. Eligibility is different, and prioritising children's palliative care is also happening to different degrees. So we don't have consistent shared understanding of who should be supported, what that support should look like. And finally, this is something that we hear repeatedly from the sector. Hospices are often stepping into filling gaps in the system. They're providing care beyond what they're funded to deliver, and what their money that they are receiving is delivering, and also supporting families where statutory services are not available. So while this reflects the strength and commitment of hospices and wider, it's really not a sustainable or equitable model. So overall, what we have is a system that is often fragmented, inconsistent, and often reactive rather than proactive. And that's what this work is trying to achieve. So as you can see, these are our old 4 categories, the 2018 categories of life-limiting and life-threatening conditions. So why do we choose to do this work now and update them? Well, firstly, we're seeing a significant increase, as we said, in demand and complexity. Children are living longer with life-limiting, life-threatening conditions, surviving conditions that previously would not have been survivable, and living with multiple complex needs. This means that more children need support for longer periods of time and often across multiple services. Secondly, there's a growing pressure on hospice sustainability, as we've talked about. There's a real risk that without change, services can become overstretched, and the ability to meet need is potentially going to be compromised. And how we see inconsistency in ICB commissioning, there's no single shared definition of the population. Variation is how need is interpreted, and differences in what is funded. And importantly, the opportunity lies currently where there is a national policy window. So there's increasing attention on children's services, integration of care, community services, early intervention, and reducing inequalities. So this is a moment where the system hopefully is open to change. Commissioning and commissioners are looking for some clarity, and there is an opportunity to influence how services are designed and funded. So this work has been not just about responding to a challenge and updating the categories, but about taking advantage of a real opportunity to shape the future system. So how did we develop it? Not just the categories, but the toolkit framework that has been produced alongside to help support professionals. So the framework and the toolkit, the categories have all been developed very deliberately to ensure it is credible, practical, and usable. It's been co-developed with National Clinical Leadership in partnership with the APPM and shaped by over 200 professionals and families and those with lived experience across the sector. So what's important is that it's not just theoretical, it's grounded in real world practice and reflects what clinicians, families, services are actually seeing. And of course, just to remind everyone that this development of this project was funded by True Colours Trust. Something that within this work that we've been doing, I think it's very clear that we need to remember that these categories are for all babies, children, young people. So it's very much from in utero right the way up to transition. So I just want to bear that in mind, so that when I talk about children within the discussion around categories, I'm actually encompassing all of these population. So these are the 3 new categories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this presentation and I'm going to show you the website. Jess, can you see that website? Okay, sorry, just check.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So this is our website, and to get to the categories, it goes on to Changing Lives, Categories of Children's Palliative Care. So these are our 3 categories. We have category A, life-threatening conditions. So this is around conditions which disease-modifying or life-prolonging treatment may be available but may fail, where intensive therapies and interventions are required to sustain or prolong life, where conditions carry a significant risk of premature death, even if treatment is pursued. So amongst all of these categories, we have some clinical characteristics. Now, it can include situations where, for example, there's a significant risk of sudden unpredictable deterioration, where there is a situation following where survival following birth or a specific intervention is uncertain. And that comes from a lot of the work done by BAPM around uncertainty and not knowing what the future may hold. And there are some clinical examples also for each category as well. So what we've tried to move away from is the kind of set, if you have this condition, then you are likely to be in this category, because we really wanted to acknowledge the fact that children are individuals, their conditions need to be sort of in that way, and actually it should be based around need rather than if you have this condition, then you're within this category. And although they're, those old categories may be helpful for some to be able to see, well, this condition equals it's a life-limiting, life-threatening condition. Actually, moving forward, it really needs to be focused around what are the needs of this child? Do they have palliative care needs? What do we need to put in place to support them and their family? It also encompasses that degree of uncertainty, as we said, around their BAPM work too. So there are some clinical examples, but which may include some conditions, but it's very much up to clinicians, families to discuss as well, have those conversations around categories. So moving on to category B, life-shortening conditions. So this is where conditions where death in childhood or early adulthood is likely due to the progressive nature of the condition or the absence of effective disease modifying or curative treatment. Again, there are some clinical characteristics, and again, some clinical examples, which again are not exhaustive. So we have talked about conditions such as Batten's or Sanfilippo syndrome. However, it's around the progressive genetic or metabolic syndrome or severe congenital anomalies with limited life expectancy, such as. And again, we mentioned about uncertainty, especially in the perinatal palliative care period, where uncertainty is very common. We don't know what that baby potentially, what their future will hold, and what their future may be uncertain when they're in utero, and we don't know what that will be like once they are born. So category C, we have severe medical complexity. So this is children with severe, and I think this is a key part of this, severe medical complexity and vulnerability, which includes multi-system involvement or profound neurological impairment, technology dependence, or extreme frailty, where there is a significant risk of life-threatening events. So it's the whole picture of severe medical complexity. The clinical characteristics here, this includes situations where a child may rely on medical technologies, but there is also a high risk of sudden deterioration. There may be some increased susceptibility to life-threatening events. The child has significant functional impairment and care needs. And again, we have some clinical examples. So a child with cerebral palsy, but also with significant medical fragility and technology dependence. A child with HIE with profound care needs. So these are our three categories, A, B, and C at the moment. And please note that the terminology change around life-limiting, life-threatening conditions. So we've remained with life-threatening conditions based on all of the feedback. So this is all of the involvement we've had with the APPM, all of the professionals, the families. So we've remained with life-threatening conditions as terminology, but what we have changed is life-limiting conditions. Now that was very purposeful. So it was based on a lot of the work, as I said, from professionals, but also families and those with lived experience around the term life shortening and life limiting, because actually it felt to some parents and to some professionals that actually it was the ideology was around that their life was limited, when actually that's not the case. Their life may be shortened, but by no means should that mean that their life is limited in any way. So what I'm going to do now is show you the toolkit that surrounds these categories that were also produced with all of the professionals and APPM as well. So this toolkit, if I'm being honest, is more for generalists than specialists. You guys know which children would benefit from palliative care. This toolkit is really going to help those who may be in a paediatric community setting, those who don't do this frequently. So this toolkit will help support those professionals, but also it might help staff within your organisations and trusts. So we have three aspects of the toolkit. So the first aspect is recognise. So recognising and identifying which babies, children, young people will benefit from a palliative care approach. That's the first step. And as we said earlier, it's around making sure early recognition rather than late recognition. So we've obviously got the categories again. Each part of the toolkit, this green box here is directly notes for clinical use. So things to just bear in mind. So although the categories are designed to be used, are there, they're also designed to be used alongside clinical professional judgment and assessment. It also would be beneficial to involve families in discussions if that's something that you feel is appropriate, but also it's to also consider the surprise question and the phase of care, which we'll talk about now. Also, please bear in mind that children and young people, and of course babies, may move between categories over time. Some children may benefit from a palliative care approach for a long time, while others might just need shorter time involvement. And you can also be in more than one category at one time as well. So the surprise question, to help us, or to help professionals identify children and to even start having those conversations around who may benefit from a palliative care approach, we ask people to start thinking about that surprise question. Would you be surprised if this child were to die in the next? Now, the reason it's a spectrum is because actually it depends on where you are and what environment you're in, whether you're in an intensive care setting, are you in the community? Are you in a children's hospice? How often do you see this child? So it needs to be a spectrum dependent on the environment that you are in. If the answer, would you be surprised, is no, that should prompt professionals to actively consider or discuss a palliative care approach with that child, if that's appropriate, and their family. So again, it must be used in conjunction with the categories, not as a replacement. And actually be mindful that within transition, adult services use that narrower 6 months, sometimes 12-month window. So actually a graded approach might help clinicians and our professionals help identify and advocate for those young people as they move towards those adult services. So what we're then going to move on to is our assessing and planning. And of course, there's some information here around the perinatal and antenatal context, and with a direct link for the BAPM framework as well. So assessing and planning. As we know, a child's condition rarely follows a straight line. So we need to be as dynamic as their condition is and their illness. And so because of that, we ask you to consider the 4 phases of care needs. So these 4 phases of care needs are not linear. A child's condition can change. It could be stable for a long time. I don't need to tell you guys this. Then that child could also move back from stable to unstable, back again to stable. But what's really important to remember is actually, yes, that's the case, but what do we need to do from a palliative care involvement point of view during that phase? So if that child is stable, but we've recognised that that child may have a palliative care need, so it might be that actually we might just start to think about that anticipatory planning and conversations while that child and family are well. So ensuring that services are coordinated, supporting the family and the child when it comes to psychosocial care. Do we need to think about accessing therapies? Again, when it comes to unstable, thinking about reassessing those needs, adjusting care plans if that's appropriate, supporting those families, and again with deteriorating and dying phase of care. Now, a child can be in any phase of care, obviously, regardless of what category they're in. These phases are intended to support planning. They do not act as thresholds for care. And please remember that any phases of care should always involve clinical judgment and family discussion. And of course, for you guys, I'm sure this is all something that you're very aware of, but we've also written some information for those who are less aware of core planning tools such as parallel planning, ACPs, and alongside the CYACP with or without respect forms as well. What's really important for those who aren't as aware of palliative care services is this interface of services. What exactly is universal, core and specialist services? What does that mean? Who is involved in these services? And most importantly, when should you as a professional seek specialist advice or support? So we've got some information around that as well. And finally, there's a clinical assessment checklist. So for professionals are encouraged to use this checklist routinely when they see the child on the child's family, or when a child's condition changes at all. So thinking about assigning the category, considering the graded question, consider the current phase of care, and with that, what actions and resources are needed, and then identifying triggers for specialist input. Does the child's needs, have they changed? Do they now exceed the capacity of universal or core teams? Do specialist services need to have some input? And then we're just going to move on to support. And the last part of this toolkit is around support. Now, what we've looked at is the 3 different domains of support. We have child and family needs, support networks, and practical needs. And so we've produced a red, amber, green rating system so that you can identify the urgency of a family's needs and help signpost them to the correct level of support, whether that's universal, core, or specialist input. So this is for you guys to have a look at. So at each stage, it gives you a prompt of what kind of themes are within the child and family's needs, so physical and clinical needs, emotional well-being, identity, spiritual, cultural, and then planning. And then dependent on the child's red, amber, green score, we'll give you some information around possible signposting and referral systems. Who needs to be in this child's care support at this moment? And I think what's really important with these parts is some kind of questions to consider for yourself as a professional, but also for families to think about as well. You know, is there an advanced care plan with or respect? Are that family and that child's cultural, spiritual needs being met? There are some more details around sort of work we're doing around digital and digital legacy as well in the future coming. So this toolkit is very much an evolving thing. You know, as time moves on, we will be adding to this and including more support that's available for families. So around support networks is around looking at the team around the child, the wider friends and family, faith, community, respite, leisure, and education. I think that's a really key one. Some of the work that's been going on around the Children and Young People's MSF has been talking about education and the importance that children are able to go to school. Actually, is school the most appropriate place for that child? Is it more about every child should have the right to an education in whatever guise that may be? So we need to think about what support that child has in place and their family to be able to go to school if that's appropriate. But if that's not, what other options are available? Is it that we need to continue education with adaptions? Is it within the home setting? Is it in the hospital setting, for example? So it's about thinking a little bit outside of the box. What could that look like for that child and that family? And again, we have some red, amber, green signposting and for support for that child and family, if it's not already in place. Now, the last part of this is around practical needs. So thinking about finance, benefits, the living environment, equipment, transport, and something that we hear very, very frequently within the Family Support Hub is around transport and home adaptations that are needed. Around food, nutrition, how is that taking place? And again, red, amber, green, potential signposting. So that's something that can be downloaded as a PDF as well, so you can have for families as well. Now, the last element of this toolkit is around the development and alignment, just to reiterate exactly how this work has come together. So reiterating the credibility and the importance of that actually this was produced with the right people being a part of this process. And for those of you who were in the working group, you will also see all of your names at the bottom there. And just to remind you, all of this work is aligned with national standards, which was all detailed here. So what I'm going to do now is very quickly go back to my presentation. Hundreds of presentations. Oh, sorry. And I'm going to talk about the differences because I think that's important for you guys who are there using these categories. Just bear with me. So what's different? So as I've said, we move on from a focus on diagnosis to a focus of need and risk. We have historically relied on potentially lists of categories and fixed categories, lists of conditions, but no child with the same diagnosis can have the same needs. The risk is often driven by complexity, instability, not just diagnosis. So this approach focuses on patterns of vulnerability and clinical uncertainty. We're trying to move away, as I've said, from late identification to early recognition. This framework really supports recognition from diagnosis or recognition that a child has palliative care or may need palliative care, including antenatal, perinatal stages. So hopefully that will give more time to plan, better support families and fewer crisis situations. I think it's really important to also think about moving away from a specialist only thinking to a whole system approach. So it's not, palliative care should not just be for the responsibility of specialist teams or hospices, but there is absolutely a time and a place for when those needs need to be met by specialist teams and hospices. But we also need to think about those universal core services too. So the framework is developed for all professionals, not just specialists. Okay, and then what we're going to hopefully achieve with the toolkit and the work here is all of the things that I've already talked about, but hopefully also a stronger position with commissioning when we have that consistent language to use. We're going to provide all of the we're going to provide and strengthen integration across our systems, but also I think what's really important is I would like it to improve outcomes and experiences for families.